In a time forgotten by most, when human beings were multiplying across the face of the earth, something dark and unseen began to spread, like a silent wind, heavy with death. Evil, subtle at first, grew like a poisonous root that crept into every corner of creation. Thoughts became selfish, desires impure, actions cruel. What was sacred was traded for pleasure. What was just was despised. Violence ceased to shock. It became routine, and the human heart stopped seeking God. The Creator, as he looked upon his work, the same creation he had formed with perfection, balance, and love, felt sorrow. Deep sorrow, not because he had lost control, but because he saw humanity destroying itself by its own will. The earth, once a reflection of his glory, was now covered in blood, pride, and corruption. Then came the decision. Difficult, painful, but necessary. The story of humanity would need a new beginning. But God, in his justice, always preserves a seed. And in the midst of chaos, one man shone like a solitary spark in total darkness. His name was Noah. While everyone followed their own paths, he followed God's. While the entire world sank into darkness, Noah stood firm. Righteous, upright. He still walked with the Creator, even when everyone around him had already forgotten him. In that corrupted generation, Noah was like a burning torch in a starless night. A living sign that, even when everything seems lost, hope still breathes. And then, God speaks. In the silence before judgment, the voice of the Creator pierces the darkness. He chooses a man, a righteous man, a survivor of faith in a condemned generation. Noah. The words are not of accusation, but of direction. God reveals his plan, and gives Noah a mission that seems impossible by human standards, but sacred in the eyes of heaven. Detailed instructions. A massive project. An ark of salvation. And Noah does not doubt. He does not question. He obeys. With faith. With fear. With reverence. While others laughed, he hammered. While they mocked, he built. Not just any vessel, but the symbol of the covenant between God and life. What follows is more than an ancient account. It is one of the most extraordinary stories ever told on earth and recorded in heaven. The great flood, the ark, the animals entering two by two, the rain that would not stop, the salvation of a chosen family, and, in the end, a promise that echoes to this day. God can restart history through a single man who chooses to obey. But before the waters fall from the sky, the Bible shows us how the earth sank morally. In Genesis chapter 6, we are taken to one of the darkest moments in human history. Wickedness was no longer accidental. It was routine. The human heart no longer struggled against sin. It delighted in it. As human beings spread across the earth, something strange began to happen. The daughters of men, beautiful, delicate, seductive, caught the attention of other beings, the sons of God. They took them as wives, not out of love, but out of lust. They chose by what pleased the eyes. They acted according to desire. There were no more boundaries. Creation had crossed an invisible line, and heaven could no longer ignore what was happening. And then, God spoke, but not with joy, with sorrow, with a heart broken by what man had become. My spirit shall not strive with man forever. He is flesh. He is mortal. His days shall be limited to 120 years. It was a solemn declaration, a set boundary, a countdown to judgment. Not out of hatred, but out of mercy. God was still giving time for repentance. But the human heart no longer responded to the voice of heaven. In those days, and even afterward, giants walked the earth. Powerful creatures, the result of a forbidden union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. They were the heroes of ancient legends, men of renown, revered, feared, but they were not righteous. They were corrupt, mighty on the outside, but rotten within. They became icons of a generation that had reversed everything. They glorified strength, but ignored truth. They exalted great feats, but rejected the Creator. And then, God looked once more upon humanity. But what he saw was not life. It was decay. Every thought, every intention, every desire was continually evil. There was no room left for goodness. Evil had become total, deep, persistent. The earth, once pulsing with the glory of God, now echoed with violence. Selfishness, perversion, not just in actions, but in the innermost intentions of the human heart. And at that moment, the saddest moment in all creation up to that point, God grieved. Yes, the Creator wept for his creature. I regret having made man on the earth. These are not words of weakness. They are the words of a father who sees his children destroying everything he gave them. God's sorrow was not the sorrow of someone who made a mistake, but of someone who loves and sees that love rejected. The Lord God was deeply grieved, not with impulsive anger, but with a heart broken by the corruption of his own creation. As he looked at mankind, he no longer saw sons. He saw enemies of the truth. Evil was no longer an isolated incident. It had become culture. Corruption was the norm. Violence, the common language of humanity. The whole earth was covered in blood, lies, lust, and rebellion. And then, God spoke with both sorrow and resolve. I will wipe from the face of the earth the human beings I have created, along with the animals, the crawling creatures, and the birds of the sky, for I am deeply grieved that I have made them. These words echo like eternal thunder. It wasn't just judgment that was announced. It was the lament of a forsaken father. The Creator of life, who had shaped man with his own hands, was now declaring the end. The earth, like a rotting fruit, needed to be cleansed from the inside out. Judgment was inevitable, but God always preserves a seed. Amid the mud of corruption, a name resounded in heaven. A man, a righteous man, Noah. Noah was not perfect, but he was faithful. In a blind generation, he could see. In a deaf generation, he could hear. While all ran toward the abyss, Noah walked with God. He was righteous. He was blameless. He was different. Noah walked with the Creator, not just with his feet, but with his heart. And that made all the difference. It was that communion that changed the destiny of humanity. Even surrounded by a society drowning in sin, Noah raised his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, with reverence and fear of the Lord. He lived as if the world had not defiled him, and because of that, heaven chose him. The earth had become the mirror of the human heart, and the reflection was dark, full of sin, saturated with violence, submerged in selfishness, arrogance, and contempt for the sacred. Creation had been corrupted to the root. Everything God had once looked upon with joy now caused him pain. The world that had once been called good in Genesis was now a field of moral and spiritual devastation. And God looked again, but this time there was no more hope in humanity. All had turned away. All. There was no one who did good. No one who cried out to the Creator. The earth cried out for justice, and heaven answered. Then God spoke, not in echoes, not in metaphors, but directly, to a man, to the only one who still listened to him. Noah, I have decided to put an end to all human beings, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I will destroy them, along with the earth. Harsh words, final, irrevocable, but spoken to a man chosen not to escape, but to cooperate with redemption. God's plan was not only to destroy, it was to begin again. But for that to happen, someone had to listen. Someone had to believe. Someone had to obey. And that someone was Noah. But God didn't just announce the end. He revealed the way of salvation. Because the heart of God, even in judgment, always prepares a path of escape for those who love him. And then came the instruction. Clear, specific, divine. Build an ark. It wasn't a raft. It wasn't just any shelter. It was a monumental vessel, designed in heaven, executed on earth. Noah was to use cypress wood, strong, durable, incorruptible. Interior compartments would be built to house all creatures. The structure had to be completely sealed with pitch, inside and out, to withstand the waters that were to come. God was precise. 133 meters long, nearly 1.5 football fields, 22 meters wide, 13 meters high, 3 decks, 1 single side door, a ventilation opening just below the roof. Every detail, every measurement, came from the mind of the Creator to the hands of Noah, and he obeyed, even without ever having seen rain, even without knowing what the end would look like. Noah built, with faith in the unseen. While the world mocked, he hammered. While men lived as if nothing would happen, Noah raised the greatest silent message of salvation in history. Because the ark was more than wood. It was a symbol, a covenant, redemption. God was about to restart the story of humanity. And the man entrusted with carrying this new chance was Noah. The key, the bridge, the faithful remnant who would keep God's promise alive. And then, God revealed the final plan to Noah. There was no turning back. Wickedness had overflowed. The measure of iniquity was full. Now, heaven was preparing to send judgment upon the earth. I am about to bring a flood upon the whole earth. A deluge that will destroy all that has the breath of life. Everything that lives will perish. Words that cut like lightning. Solemn words. Terrifying. Unquestionable. Yet even in the face of such a decree, God sets the righteous apart. And with Noah, he makes a promise. A covenant. But with you, Noah, I will establish my covenant. This was not merely a survival guarantee. It was the beginning of a new era. A new chapter in humanity, written with faith, with wood, with obedience, and with hope. The mission was clear. Noah was to enter the ark with his wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. He was to bring a pair of every living species, birds, land animals, and creeping creatures. And he was also to store enough food for all, humans and animals, for an undetermined period of time. It was a divine operation of preservation. The world would be cleansed, but life would go on, through the faithfulness of one man. Noah did not just receive a mission. He became the guardian of the continuity of creation. Everything God had made in the beginning was now entrusted to him to protect. While the world celebrated its feasts and sank into its sins, Noah obeyed. He worked, he built, and he waited with fear and trust in the God of the covenant. Noah did not hesitate. He did not doubt. He did not question. He trusted fully in the God who speaks and fulfills. While every eye mocked, while men called it madness, Noah obeyed in silence. Hammer after hammer, board after board. Each gesture was an act of faith. Each day of labor, a silent prayer. He didn't know the day or the exact hour, but he knew that the word of God never fails. And so, he continued, steadfast, constant, in reverence and awe. And then, the day came. The ark was ready. The heavens were still. But the heart of God began to move. In Genesis chapter 7, God breaks the silence and speaks once more to Noah. But now, with a final command, a sacred summons. Go into the ark, you and your whole family. For among all the people of the earth, only you have been found righteous before me. This is one of the most powerful statements in all of Scripture. While billions lived in contempt of the Creator, one man was found righteous. One man, one family, one faith, and that was enough to move heaven, to preserve creation, to give the world another chance. Judgment was at the door, but the ark was open, and the chosen one was Noah. This time, the command was more detailed, more urgent, more precise, because God was not only preserving life, he was preparing a new beginning. Noah was to bring into the ark 7 pairs of every clean animal, those that would be used for worship and sacrifice, 1 pair of every unclean animal, for preservation and balance in creation, 7 pairs of every kind of bird, so that life, upon leaving the ark, could once again fill the skies and the fields. It was more than protection. It was multiplication. It was purpose. It was an eternal plan. And then came the final instruction. In just 7 days, the rain will begin to fall. And it will not stop for 40 days and 40 nights. Every living creature on the face of the earth will be destroyed. 7 days. Time was counted. God's clock had begun to tick. Noah, now 600 years old, did not waste a single moment. He obeyed faithfully, without hesitation, without delay, without fear. And when the day came, Noah entered the ark with his wife, his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. But something even more extraordinary happened. Creation itself responded to the call of the Creator. Birds of the sky, great felines, reptiles crawling in the dust, clean and unclean animals from the four corners of the earth, all began to move, male and female, in pairs, with order, with precision, not led by Noah, but guided by the invisible voice of God. They knew, instinctively they knew, judgment was near, but salvation was in the ark. And then 7 days passed, and judgment began. On the 17th day of the 2nd month of that sacred year, the heavens were torn open, and the depths of the earth broke loose. It was as if all of creation, in unison, collapsed in mourning. The fountains of the great deep, hidden in the earth's core since the foundation of the world, burst forth with fury, and the windows of heaven, once pouring dew and blessing, now opened to unleash judgment. It rained, torrentially, without ceasing, for 40 days and 40 nights. That land, once full of life, color, and sound, was swallowed by a wet and solemn silence. Laughter ceased. Screams were drowned. And all that once seemed eternal now sank beneath the judgment of the eternal God. On that same day, the darkest in history to that point, Noah and his family entered the ark. His wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. They passed through the only door opened by grace, the door of obedience, the door of salvation. But they were not alone. All of creation had been summoned by God. Domestic animals and wild beasts, crawling reptiles and birds of the sky, small and great creatures, clean and unclean, all came, all entered in pairs, male and female, in silence, in order, in obedience to the voice of the Creator. The earth was being judged. But inside that ark, life still breathed. The promise still lived. Hope still had a name. And then, the Lord stretched out his hand, and he closed the door of the ark. It wasn't Noah. It wasn't his sons. It was God himself who sealed the refuge of the promise. Because when judgment begins, grace becomes inaccessible to those who have rejected it. And so began the great flood. For 40 days, waters fell from the heavens in relentless torrents. At the same time, the earth's depths opened like ancient wounds, releasing their stored-up fury, hidden since creation. There was no truce, no pause, no mercy. Those waters carried the judgment of God, unrelenting, righteous, total. They rose quickly. They swallowed fields, villages, towers, forests. The ark, once still upon dry ground, was lifted by the waters and began to float, like a sanctuary in the midst of chaos. The hills disappeared. The mountains vanished. Even the highest peaks on earth were covered by 7 meters of water above their summits. No living creature escaped. All that had the breath of life died. Birds, livestock, wild beasts, reptiles, men, women, children, nations. All of humanity was silenced. The earth, once vibrant, full of voices, footsteps, and laughter, had become a liquid desert, an ocean of silence, a graveyard with no tombstones. And only one thing remained afloat: the ark, faithfulness, covenant, hope. Only Noah, and those who were with him in the ark, were saved. Judgment was complete. Destruction, total. For 150 days, the earth was swallowed by the waters of heaven and the abyss. Only what was inside the ark survived. A remnant, a thread of hope floating over a world buried beneath the waters of divine justice. But God never forgets those who are faithful to him, even in the silence of the flood. Even when the heavens seemed closed and the horizon empty, God remembered. Then God remembered Noah and all the living creatures that were with him in the ark. Genesis 8 verse 1. And when God remembers, everything begins to change. A wind blew over the earth. Not an ordinary wind, but the wind of a new beginning. The breath of mercy. The breath of God over a world being given a second chance. The fountains of the deep were sealed. The windows of heaven were closed. The rain ceased. The fury was restrained. Justice had been satisfied. And grace began to work. For another 150 days, the waters slowly receded, as if God himself was draining the earth with careful hands. Then, on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark, once adrift, came to rest. It was not by chance. It was not luck. It was divine direction. It settled on the mountains of Ararat, like a sacred hand resting upon solid rock, silent, steady, perfect. As the days passed, the waters continued to go down, and on the first day of the 10th month, the mountain peaks began to appear. They were like the fingers of creation reaching toward heaven, silent signs that the new beginning was near. 40 days passed, and then Noah, with a heart full of hope, walked to the small window of the ark. He opened it, and what he found was the absolute silence of a newly judged world. No voices, no leaves, no movement. The earth had been cleansed, but also emptied. So Noah released a raven. The bird flew off, restless, impatient. It flew back and forth across the gray sky, but found no place to rest. It came and went, for the earth was still covered by the waters of judgment. Then Noah tried again, but this time with a dove, a symbol of peace, of purity, of hope. He released it with a breath of faith. Perhaps it would find a place to rest its feet, but there was no solid ground, no place to land, and the dove, weary and without shelter, returned. And Noah, with a father's tenderness, reached out his hand and brought her back into the ark. There, where life still remained, there, where promise still lived. 7 days passed, 7 days of waiting, of prayer, of expectation. And again, Noah released the dove. The sky still gray, the earth still silent, but something had changed. At evening, she returned, and in her beak, she carried a leaf, fresh, from an olive tree, a simple branch, green, alive. But to Noah, it was more than botany. It was prophecy. It was an answer. It was the whisper of God saying, "Life is returning." Hope, once invisible, now had form. The waters were receding. A new beginning was on the way. 7 days later, Noah released the dove once more, and this time, she did not return. No sign, no flutter of wings, because out there, the earth was ready. The world, now cleansed, could once again receive life. And then came the first day of the first month. Time had turned a page. It was the beginning of a new chapter. Noah, with weathered hands and eyes full of faith, removed the covering of the ark. And for the first time, after months of silence and darkness, he saw the earth drying. Solid ground reappeared beneath the sky. On the 27th day of the second month, the earth was completely dry. And then God spoke, not with wrath, not with judgment, but with freedom, with purpose, with blessing. Come out of the ark, you, your wife, your sons, and your daughters-in-law. Bring out all the animals with you, birds, livestock, wild beasts, and all that crawls on the ground. Let them spread out across the earth, let them multiply, let them fill this world with life once again. The ark, which had once been a refuge, now became a starting point. The story was beginning again, and Noah stepped out, accompanied by his family, accompanied by a new destiny. Behind him, in silence and in order, came the animals, in pairs, by kind, birds spreading their wings, felines walking firm, creeping things sliding across the ground. It was like a parade of grace, a sacred procession, the rebirth of creation. And before anything else, before planting, before building, before celebrating, Noah built an altar to the Lord, with his own hands, on the ground that had been reborn through judgment. There, he bowed down. There, he worshipped. There, he acknowledged, everything we have still comes from God. There, upon the still damp earth, under a sky cleansed by justice and grace, Noah knelt, with reverence, with humility, with gratitude in his chest and awe in his eyes. He built an altar to the Lord, not in haste, not as a ritual, but as an act of love, a silent gesture that said, Thank you for not giving up on us." And there, he offered sacrifices with clean birds and animals, one of each kind, just as God had commanded, not out of obligation, but out of praise. A fragrance rose from the earth, not just of fire and flesh, but of surrender and worship. And the Lord, upon smelling that aroma of faithfulness, was deeply pleased, not by the scent of smoke, but by the heart that lit the flame. Never again will I curse the ground because of mankind, even though their inclination toward evil begins from youth. Never again will I destroy all living things as I have done. And then God made an eternal decree: as long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night, shall never cease. The cycle of life had begun again, but now, sealed by a covenant between God and the man who feared him. Noah stepped out of the ark onto a silent, renewed earth. The world had changed. Nothing was as it had been. Not the ground, not the sky, not the sounds, but one thing remained: the covenant, the promise, the presence, the God of new beginnings. Noah did not seek glory. He did not build cities. He did not raise monuments to his own name. He built an altar, and before anything else, he worshipped. It was this gesture, simple, sincere, eternal, that moved the heart of the Creator. An altar, a flame, a sacrifice, but above all, a grateful heart, a reverent spirit, a surrendered soul. The aroma that rose from that altar was not just smoke. It was the fragrance of a faith that had survived the chaos. It was the silent sound of someone who still loved him, truly. And then God, the same God who had judged with justice, made a promise, an eternal promise. Never again will I destroy all life as I have done. As long as the earth remains, there will be seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night. Life began again. The covenant was sealed, and hope stood firm. Because this story is not just about destruction. It's about grace. It's about redemption. It's about a new beginning. It is an eternal reminder that even in times of moral collapse, God still finds the righteous. There are still hearts that seek Him. There is still hope. And every time someone chooses to remain faithful, a new future can be born.